Could you just state for the record your name and when and where you were born?
Mhm. I'm Stanislava Pinchuk, and I was born in Kharkiv, in Ukraine.
And
And now we're talking in Sarajevo, where I live. Yeah. Mm.
um, can you tell us a bit about your background and how you came to your current artistic practice?
Yeah, yeah. Um, I think I studied philosophy first of all. Um, and as a teenager, I kind of fell into a lot of like punk rock culture and zines, DIY, skating, graffiti, street art. And that was a really big part of my life. And I think maybe from there, I kind of found that there was an art world. There was a bigger art world. And I met, a lot of older people who were doing things. And I ended up studying philosophy. I kind of didn't want to go to art school. I thought maybe I would do it for my master's or something, and I never did. But I thought I kind of wanted to learn. I don't know what to paint about rather than how to paint necessarily. And I'm glad I did it because I think it informed my practice since then. And I think since then I'd say it's been kind of informed perhaps by just following curiosity. So uh, my work is kind of now very much about finding the right medium for the right idea, and kind of very naturally kind of first went to kind of more gallery work and data mapping conflict zones. And, a big part of that is the situation of Ukraine for the last 11 years. Um, and then kind of, yeah, maybe breaking out a bit more into sculpture and architecture, installation, film, um, coding, so I kind of, as an artist, kind of like to surprise myself, and then I like to surprise others. And I think maybe that's kind of what's guided the artwork to kind of what it is now. Yeah.
What kind of philosophies were you interested in when you were studying philosophy?
I really loved the Greeks. I really loved the Greeks, and I think you can see it in my work now, to make, I just made these two quite big works side by side of that, one about Homer's Odyssey and one about the Iliada. Um, and I think it's still kind of, yeah, I think it's still coming through in a lot of ways, and the next works that are coming up. So I think it's never left me, but I've always really loved the world of the classics, and phenomenologists I really loved. And in fact, this last body of work I made was very, very indebted to the writings of Georges Didi Huberman, who, I mean, for me is such a phenomenologist. So yeah, I think it really did actually shape what I do very, very much.
Mm. Are there any recurring themes in your work, in your body of work?
Yeah, yes, I think so. I think it's been very much a, maybe one very, very big thread is this kind of negotiation of conflict, of war, of post-war space, of the political space. Um, yeah, which I think is quite autobiographical. And then more recently, which I think was very much about kind of ground and geography, and maybe to kind of speak of the ancient Greeks, this kind of Euclid's idea of, geometry as earth measurement was kind of quite, always been quite radical to me. And I think since I kind of had a lapse in doing field work in the pandemic because I could no longer work to make data maps of sites of conflict, I think that interest in data and kind of earth measurement very much kind of entered the space of language
Mhm.
and translation, and I think also very influenced by having moved to Bosnia and Herzegovina, and kind of being in a new language and learning a new language and being between language and translation. And also kind of this era of conflict we live in now, which is so shaped by language and the power and interpretation of the word, which also I think goes so full circle to ancient Greeks
Mm.
and the kind of idea of debate and discourse and distilling kind of concept and meaning and practical action. So I think that's also been maybe the big thread of the work increasingly, is also the way that um, language and literature and translation kind of enter that through line of conflict, I would say. So I think, yeah, it's very autobiographical in this way. I think,
And
whatever medium that it's expressed in, yeah.
um, to switch our attention a bit to the work in Tirana, what drew you to apply for the residency there?
Um, I think at first I would say that it was kind of a way for me to maybe close my own personal understanding of European communism, because I was born still under the Soviet occupation of Ukraine, and so I grew up in the fall of communism and the years after the fall of communism. I live now in the former Yugoslavia, which is also a very, very different history. And so for me, Albania was this kind of very, just maybe in my own sphere of understanding, this last piece of the puzzle, you know? And I think because of the kind of politics of the Soviet Union now, in the rhetoric of Putin and the Russian invasion of Ukraine, as this kind of ideology which refuses to die, this totalitarianism that refuses to die. And you see it in the tanks that the hammer and sickle is spray painted on the tanks that entered Ukraine. It's the hammer and sickle is spray painted on communist slogans, USSR number two, 2.0, whatever, left as graffiti by occupation soldiers. And so, yeah, I kind of also began to think about this idea of this kind of communism and kind of refusal of an ideology to die, and also kind of how it kind of lingers as this sort of undead, in this kind of zombie that's also very real, and so yeah, I suppose that was a kind of really big question for me personally and intellectually, that I felt, I don't know, Albania was somehow a part of that research, or that kind of wider framework. And I think there was also a second part, which, um, I mean, it's just such an extraordinary kind of idea and opportunity. And I guess kind of having been born in, like I said, in this, quite ordinary communist occupation setting, and like really not any, and no special story, just another shitty apartment block, and with not much going on. And then I don't know, I think there was this idea that, you never know what the future brings, that you could live in the house of a communist dictator, and how crazy the future is, and what a thing when you grow up, kind of in circumstances that kind of robbed your future, what the future can be, and I guess I was also kind of quite fascinated by that, to experience it. I mean, what a privilege, also, it's heavy work. It was heavy work. It was a heavy place to be, but also
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
surreal, like a dream, yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the heaviness of it, because obviously that that site is a site of trauma for many people in Albania, and people have
Mm,
had such a mixed response to the opening of the villa
yes,
and turning
yes.
it into an artist's residence. And I guess, I mean, you spoke a bit about this. I just wanted to know more about your experience of living there and how,
Mm,
and especially because your work is so closely tied to the space as well. Um,
mm, mm.
how that.
Yeah, look, I think there are no easy answers, and I have a lot of thoughts in a lot of directions about this. Um, it's a really heavy place, It's a really heavy house. It occupies such a heavy place in the city, like it's this, kind of islanded, but it's almost like a black hole, in the city. Like it's and the way that when you're inside and people don't look, they walk past and they don't even look at the house. It's um and you feel it, like it's and you feel it inside the house. I didn't sleep for 3 months, my God, the dreams and the everything. It's really, really heavy, really heavy. And
We've been hearing this a lot from the
mm,
residents saying that they've had trouble sleeping.
yeah, yeah. But I think at the same time, we're not here to do easy work or convenient work or ideologically convenient work. Of like you take your one experience of being an artist on this planet and you do it right. And and I think this is a place with no easy answers, and I try in my work and my kind of teaching is something that I try to do is really not be didactic, nor do I try to be solutionist, and I'm not sure this is a house with an easy solution, and I think what appeals to me about the idea of a residency is maybe this isn't the solution forever. Maybe it's not the right thing for it to be forever, but maybe it needs to pass through this for 10 years, or, maybe then it can become a museum or be demolished or whatever happens. But maybe what I'm kind of interested in are ideas of transition and kind of transitional justice and, these kind of frameworks within wider restorative justice, you know? And I think it's very, very difficult because I think there is so much to grapple with. I think in Albania, on the whole, culturally, I think there's still a lot to grapple with. And I often do question whether Albania is also really ready for a project like this, you know? Um, and even doing some of my research and trying to kind of find information and seeing other artists as well, I did find a lot of obstruction, and people still trying to kind of cover for history or apologize for history and the kind of, I don't know, tension and suspicion of also what's happening in the villa. And also you just kind of seeing how many of this kind of zombie communism is still around was, really, um, I mean, it's nothing I don't know from Ukraine, but I suppose war kind of changed that a lot as well, in Ukraine, is kind of, yeah, post-Soviet mentalities. So yeah, I guess I was kind of very interested in the potential of the residency to be a place of transition or questioning, and not giving answers, but actually being there not because we have answers, but because we have questions. Um, and I do think that the criticism that the project got, which I do understand, and we were in the first group in, so we also didn't know how a lot of it functioned. Nobody did. We were sort of figuring it out on the spot, and mm, you know, we didn't come to an established way of working or being or communicating. And something that I think would have been really could have been handled in a different way is maybe the kind of press releases and public communications of this project, instead of kind of also putting artists and arts workers on the firing line, is I think to call it a residency in a city that doesn't have existing residencies, for example. So you can't point to something else and say, like, it's going to be like that, you know? So when people kind of saw it as a party place, and the way that the first kind of flyers and things kind of, I think, didn't acknowledge the heaviness, and that the show that was put on, we kind of had to figure out where we showed the works ourselves. We didn't have a curator or somebody who thought about it more holistically or structurally, about how people feel when they walk in, and how trauma and tension and pain are mediated, you know, which are all really, really real, and also really heavy. So I do think it could have maybe benefited from maybe communication of, or maybe even just some different phrasing, like to call it like a living museum, or a temporary transitional, you know, space or project, or, you know, or maybe kind of soft launched a bit, that people are also kind of ready or have a bit more of a say, or, you know, because I do think it came from kind of a very elite level of kind of, I don't know, government and international cooperation with France, who I would say didn't always understand the heaviness of the place, which was in my experience of kind of having gone through the process and been part of it. Yeah.
And then your works sort of had to carry that heaviness that people brought, because and in the first session, it was like the first time that some people were seeing the villa, like Pinchuk, the people.
Yes.
And
Yes.
yeah, and so I feel like the works also received all of that baggage, but in a way it wasn't yours. Um,
Uh, they did, but also, to be honest, sometimes the baggage was also not received, you know, and I kind of thought I made work that was quite, for me, vulnerable in a lot of ways. And um, I also found, like, yeah, I don't know, some of the reaction, you know, especially when you make a work as a woman about humiliation, you know, I was also like sexually harassed, you know, for the work that I put out there, because it had my nudity, you know. We had people stealing our things, you know, like from our studios, from, you know, I had people posing with my props, which were really heavy, and they were, you know, it was a work about genocide of Ukrainians and Holodomor, and this, you know, which my grandparents survived, and it was, you know, it was a really heavy work that I made in a space which, yeah, I think also in turn wasn't always respected either, which also made it very difficult, you know. And this is what I say when artists are in this kind of, you know, I mean, this is what we do, this is our job, this is our life, but it is a kind of, you're in a very, very interesting kind of mediation as a creative between a lot of very, very different forces, you know. Yeah, but I mean, this is what we do, you know, this is the life. And yeah, again, it's not always about answers, but the questions. So it's, you know, and I don't mean to say it in, you know, I'm not saying it like a value judgment per se. I'm just kind of describing it, if that makes sense. It's not a complaint, you know.
no, of course.
It's just assessment, I suppose. Yeah.
Could you describe your work? Because we've been just skirting around it, so
Yeah, of course.
we can really dive into, if you could just describe the work, the installation, and then what you also showed in your studio and the research behind it.
Did you see it?
Yes, I
Were
was.
you there?
Yeah.
Very cool. Okay, amazing. I yeah, it's kind of a hard question to answer in a way, because the project is not finished, you know, and I actually need a little bit of time now, because I think everything was so intense, you know, with the villa, the making, the opening, and I really made this film for the space that it was shown in, and the space that it was filmed in. So it was kind of this, you know, film that was like a meta architectural view onto where it was shot. And now that, you know, it won't be shown ever again in that space, I have to kind of think about it more with a bit more distance, you know, which I haven't kind of yet been able to find. I think, yeah, everything was so intense that I think I need to actually leave it physically away from me for a little while. But basically, the first cut, which was shown in Tirana, and the basis of the work is a 3-channel video installation, which is kind of a half performance work, half kind of vampire film, in which I undergo hypnosis in this kind of vampiric sense to an old kind of the way I've been speaking about it, this kind of idea of the monstrous and accusations of the monstrous and the undead ideology and the kind of fundamental violence of a totalitarian society in which these accusations are leveled, you know, in every possible direction. Elites to workers to neighbors within families and so forth. It's a work in which I undergo hypnosis to forget Russian and to kind of become a post-colonial body to, or whether it's possible to get rid of a tongue in this very vampiric, you know, Bram Stoker's Dracula way, where the tongue is severed from your throat, you know, and all of this kind of ideological basis for why Bram Stoker and his whole vampire fiction of the 19th century was kind of an ostracization of the kind of Eastern European Balkan body. So yeah, it was kind of filmed and shot in the villa, which just features me undergoing hypnosis in kind of 3 different settings. And now it's become a little bit bigger. I think it'll actually be a series of paintings, and I've been working on a book of Hodge's private library inventory, which I found and kind of realized it was quite incomplete. And so I've actually finished the 2nd draft of the manuscript yesterday. And that's also a kind of, I think, a part of it, because it started as trying to find the vampire books he was reading and kind of going to sort of figure it out. And then it became a much bigger project, because also, you know, he was reading the Greeks, the philosophers, the Odyssey, Iliad. Oh no, he didn't have the Iliad, pardon. He did have the Odyssey that I found. And a lot of like the ancient materialists, he really read a lot of that. So I think I started to again find these kind of threads of data and conflict and literature translation, because he was reading mostly in French. And I think through doing this really intensive cataloging process and making a book of that, somehow I think the project is still growing and resolving, you know, like very fresh, you know. So I actually think probably the final work from the villa is, to be very honest, maybe about a year and a half away from actually being shown. Yeah, so I think it kind of started a bigger thing than I expected, actually, to make a concise work in 3 months. It's just become this kind of exploded without an answer yet. But yeah,
That's amazing.
mm.
The initial questions were fertile ground.
Yes.
But I'm also intrigued by your inspiration from this excavation of a body of a woman in Poland who was thought to be a vampire.
Yeah.
She was buried with a sickle around her throat and the padlock on her toe. Could you say a bit more about that and how you transformed it? Because in your work, then there's a materiality of these tools, tools of livelihood, but also there are symbols of communism. So could you speak a bit about that inspiration?
Yeah. I this woman was found only recently, maybe like 2 or 3 years ago. and so the work is still kind of ongoing about her. And she was the genesis for this project, reading the news articles and whatever I could find that was available from the universities. But basically, you know, she was found, she was buried 400 years ago, and I think she was in her early 20s, is what they think. And, you know, very much like the vampire or kind of undead stories that I grew up with, it's that there were always these almost tricks that people, that the undead would die again if they woke up, you know, so they would have like a padlock or like a little bell on their foot in case, you know, that it would kind of alert people that they had woken up, and that if she, I guess the idea here was that if she woke up again, that she would cut her own head against the sickle, you know. And when I read that, I thought, what an apt symbol for communism, this kind of totalitarianism, where one wrong move against the symbol and your head is cut off, you know. And it's so true of this like fundamental necropolitical structure of communism, where you know, one wrong laugh, one wrong eye roll, one wrong smile gets you, you know, killed or sent to prison or the gulag or whatever, you know, and condemn your whole family, you know. So you're always kind of keeping watch for the monster as well, because you're kind of, you know, one wrong move, you know, it's like a horror film. You snap one twig when you're walking in the forest, and you know, you're found out, you know. It's like this. And I thought, what a powerful symbol, especially of, you know, the Holodomor and communist occupation, when the people's tools, you know, the sickle of agriculture, and Ukrainian agriculture and wheat, is also used against people to kind of also sever this, that, you know, people are, don't get to eat, you know. And you know exactly what's going on with Gaza now, you know. And I refuse to call it famine, you know, because it's not. It's a famine is when the crops fail. Here it's, you know, very deliberate starvation and denial of delivery and distribution of food. It's completely man-made, you know. And so I suppose these things have been on my mind in a big way, you know, in multiple ways. And again, in full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and the kind of wheat and food security politics. And so I think it was kind of the symbol of this woman was kind of apt on multiple levels, and also the fact that she herself, in this kind of really amazing way, was also sort of rescued from the dead, you know, in that she was buried for 400 years until they found her, and now she has a name. They call her Zorsha because they felt weird to call her like a number or a specimen, so they gave her a name, and they reconstructed her from her DNA and kind of made, now she has a face, like a 3D model of what they think her face could have looked like. And so in this kind of extraordinary way, she also really came back from the dead, like she really is a vampire.
Yeah, I think one of the archaeologists was saying that they did everything to make sure that she doesn't rise, and now we're doing everything to give her another life with the
Yes.
reconstruction. Yeah.
Yes. So that was kind of the big genesis of the project, and I think why I put all my notes and research out there is because I knew this wasn't the final version of the film. I knew this was a draft, but I think what's really interesting about communism, what I really noticed in Albania, is so much of it is not written, you know. There's so much that is just oral history or urban legend, and there were so many things that I found out very late in the residency or the making process, just because you are in the right time and right place to talk to somebody, you know. And that's the big reason that I wanted to show the film as a first draft and put my notes on the wall, which I never do as an artist. This is never my process. I always put like a very resolved, finished, polished work out there. It was also because I wanted to kind of cast everything out to see what would come back in just speaking to people, and people telling me what I should look at or go and read or who to talk to, and that it was still like a kind of one part of this sort of generative process of this work. And it really did happen like that, you know, and I'm still following up a lot. So I think that that's where also these kind of sites of trauma and ambivalence and transition are also, for me, also kind of really interesting in what they're able to generate, you know, and kind of centralize these sort of decentralized things and kind of redistribute them again, you know, this kind of contamination point, I suppose. Yeah.
Now, to stay a bit longer with this image of the
Mhm.
body and fun, um, in your talk with Jakub Mikanovsky, you mentioned the notion of Ketman, um,
Ah, yes. Yeah.
and which roughly translates as the simulation concealment. It's actually a Farsi term, and
Yes.
um, Czeslaw Milosz was inspired by this term to speak of subjects under totalitarianism, very much in
Mm.
response to Hannah Arendt's notion that totalitarianism creates these subjects that are incapable of critical thought.
Mm.
Milosz was kind of saying the opposite, that um, they actually become very dexterous. They develop these mechanisms and create these sort of private sanctuaries um,
Mm.
when there's exterior coercion. Could
Mm.
you talk a bit more about that, about this notion?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was extraordinary how Yakov talked about it because it's his PhD thesis, you know. So I also feel a little bit inadequate compared to, you know, his world with Milosh at the moment. But I guess if I had to kind of make my own assessment, I would say that kind of both things are true somehow, you know. At the same time, I think both of these kind of assessments are true. And I think about one of my big heroes on this on this creative life was a kind of very dissident Serbian architect called Bogdan Bogdanovic, who was a really big, kind of the first big critic of Milosevic, actually, and was kind of sent into exile into first Paris, then Vienna, and he has this amazing book called The Green Box, and he writes how, yeah, like he found these ways around it, like he was the Ketman, you know, and he found these sort of ways around it, and until he found that it it affected him, like he became then the kind of Hannah Arendt idea, like he actually did become completely kind of he noticed that the censorship was actually kind of killing him on the inside, even though he'd been fighting it. And so he started this project called the Green Box with his students, where he would, it had no answer, like it was like a green box. And every dream, every thought, every idea that he and his students had, they would just write it and put it in the box, just so they would be like free, like they would like let go of these ideas and they would like wash them through, not internalize them, and that they actually had to kind of almost fight to be the Ketman, you know. And when it kind of got really hairy for him and he had to flee, and they sent people to his house, he smashed the box and took all the little notes with him and hid them like just everywhere because the border police would be too stupid to figure it out. It wasn't like a manuscript. And then it was the last book he published, were all the notes of this green box, and it's like this. It's the most, like, I have like goosebumps just to talk about it. It's the most kind of, I don't know, incredible project. This is a bit of a sidebar, but I don't know. Maybe I think these two things are true at the same time. I don't know. I always felt like he embodied it in this moment, you know? And yeah, like what it takes to stay a free thinker. You
Yeah.
know?
Um, I feel that's another really important line of thought in your work that responds, or I don't know if it responds, maybe this idea of the vampire as a way of thinking the post, um, the post-communism and the body in this post
Mm.
um and yeah, the figure of the ghost as the ghost and the vampire as this thing that refuses to die. Um,
Mm.
when you were talking to Jakob, I was reminded a lot of Derrida and like his book Spectres of Marx. It's,
Yes. Yes.
his very like cheeky response to Marx's language. First of all,
Mm.
Marx is this like dialectical materialist par excellence.
Yes, yes, yes.
He starts his book, the first noun of the Communist Manifesto is specter.
Mm-hmm.
It's like immaterialism sneaks in through metaphors, through,
Mm-hmm.
through language. Yeah. And then secondly, Derrida wrote that after the fall of the Berlin Wall,
Yeah.
when there was a lot of talk about the end of history, and
Oh
how
yeah, that old thing. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and how well the end of communism and the triumph of the free market was sort of the fulfillment of human
Mm.
history. And Derrida was saying how
Yeah.
injustice and inequality remain as the specters
Mm.
of capitalism. Like communism might have fallen, but
Yeah.
Marxism still returns. Um, so could you speak a bit more about about this post communism and the body and how can we be post?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I guess that was the big question. Can we? You
Yeah.
know, can we? And when I say like accusations of the monstrous exist in a kind of violent society on every level, you know, colonial societies, totalitarian societies, you know, this violence is kind of at every, it's aimed in every direction, you know, not just within, you know, government and the people, but government at work, government, you know, people within their own families. And I'm not exempt, you know, in the film. I think that's why I'm also the monster, you know, because there's this kind of, I don't know, really interesting psychology in my generation, I guess, because you still have this kind of, somehow by having been somehow this sphere of communism, is somehow the monster within you, is the apologist, is the, you know, the colonial language is still somehow within you, you know. And I use some, is it somehow the monster is also deep in there somewhere that you don't even know, you know, on a very subconscious level. So I think this is what I mean. I don't mean to make like a kind of didactic or denunciatory work. I think it's a very, really complicated work about who the monster is, you know, because it's like, you know, the party leadership calls a lot of, you know, common people and, you know, traitors and so on the monster. The people call the leadership the monsters, you know, and that's kind of this, you know, neighbors call each other monsters, families call each other monsters, you know, report on each other. I mean, this is the kind of violence in this society. But I think I have to say, I don't think I was thinking a lot about Deleuze. Sorry, I wasn't thinking a lot about Derrida, but I was thinking a lot about Deleuze, actually, and his kind of idea that the symbol is not really the symbol. The symbol is actually this kind of much more elastic and um, kind of, I don't know, fluid hieroglyph or something, you know, because I was, you know, very nervous to use, and I'm still very, very nervous to use the star, the hammer, the sickle, even against themselves, because, you know, legally in Ukraine, it's also, these are now like the equivalent of a swastika in Germany. We can use them for educational purposes, but, you know, anything else is, you know, outside of the law now. So, you know, they're really heavy. They're really, really heavy symbols. And I think kind of thinking about this in the, yeah, more this kind of, I don't know, maybe kind of dialogue between Deleuze and post-communism and the kind of dilution of the symbol, and it may transitional also point of the symbol, was maybe what I was thinking about. But Yeah, I think something that Jakob wrote in his book, which was a really big reference for me, and it was so extraordinary to speak to him in person about it. And he wrote also about this, about Yugoslavia, you know, and kind of also communism, that these were all based on acts of like mutual forgetting, you know, like nobody was a Nazi, nobody was a Chetnik, we were all partisans, we were, you know, like everything's gravy. And then there was a time when like those corpses could no longer be buried, you know, that they kind of almost like the ground expunged them, like the ground almost like rejected them, you know, and that these we had to kind of deal with these corpses, you know, and communism is very much um, that as well. And these kind of, yeah, zombie communist, early proto-capitalist cowboy years. This, yeah, was kind of a really interesting time to grow up in, you know, and more interesting now in the kind of rear view image of history. And yeah, so I think maybe this is also kind of has a very interesting relationship with the undead, that the dead could no longer stay dead in the way that they were dead in this time, you know. And and yeah, and I think it's really true now in the kind of contemporary, you know, context of what it is, I think, to be in the Balkans now as well, and to kind of find, you know, like the position of Bosnia, the position of Kosovo, you know, like these kind, like how impossible these acts of forgetting are, you know, how like truly impossible, you know, and maybe it's really necessary that it is impossible, you know, like, and not to do this thing again. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe this is what I've been thinking about a lot as well, kind of how it pertains to these kind of, yeah, I don't know, regions of my life, I suppose. Does that answer the, sorry, does that answer the question?
No, it does.
Yeah, yeah.
I want to ask a question a bit to touch again on the symbolism and how we change of symbolism through time, but then I feel in today's time there's a lot of revival through aestheticism, and maybe how
Mm.
you interact with it, or how do you see it, or how it affects your process.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a pretty broad question, I suppose, in that way. And I think I've seen a few artworks recently from kind of former communist countries, like Romania, um, Bulgaria, that I found a little bit objectionable personally. Like I did find them a little bit nostalgic and a little bit maybe contrived a little bit, I suppose, in kind of really understanding the past. And it's something yeah, still really sensitive about this work of mine, and I'm trying to work out. But I suppose maybe a larger question about kind of revivals, it's very hard to answer because I think it's so circumstantial to what is revived and why, you know, and by which country or which subculture or which genre or whatever. But I think that generally always speaks to kind of a cultural need, you know, the way that we talk about the past often doesn't speak a lot as much about the past as it speaks about the present, you know, and like any, you know, historical adaptation, let's say in film or whatever, like it's so impossible to make a period piece because it's so rarely accurate, because it's always kind of filtered through like a beauty standard or architectural standard or material availability of like the time that it's made in, you know, and like why you know, why it was like, why were the, you know, 80s so kind of obsessed with the 50s and the 70s obsessed with the 30s, and now like kids are obsessed with, you know, Y2K and, you know, so on. Is like, I think because I think the most interesting thing is always about what does that fascination or uncovering or investigation or appropriation kind of say about the needs of the current moment, you know? yeah, whether it's a kind of reclamation of like anti-colonial history, or to something like, I don't know, a pair of low-rise pants, right? I don't know. I'm not sure if did I understand correctly, or
Yeah, it always seems to be symptomatic in a way,
mm,
the possibilities of the present. Like I'm thinking of Mark Fisher's term
mm,
cancellation of the future. We were saying how, we keep returning. Use the
yeah,
past because creativity is no longer possible under
yeah,
form of late capitalism.
yeah. But I was thinking a lot about the end of history. I mean, the previous film I made before this one, the Theatre of War, that was about Homer's Iliad, was um, kind of, yeah, completely about this sort of idea of like that there at some point there was a kind of end of history, and the marbles, and yeah, I've been thinking about it a lot, because I think we'd really I've been trying to figure out personally whether it's like, is this just growing up, or is the world insane? Am I burdened and overwhelmed by the world because this is what it's just like to be in your mid-30s, and kind of assent to some level of like, yeah, responsibility, or is the world just particularly especially insane right now, and it's really helped to speak to older people to understand that the world is fucking insane, and that there also was a period that we thought, yeah, there was a kind of end of history, and Francis Fukuyama, that we were moving to kind of liberal global democracies, and that was the end of that, and we don't invade each other, and kind of how. And I don't even think it was a correct assessment at the time, no, especially not from, the perception of the Balkans by any fucking means, and or Kosovo and Bosnia, and I mean, Georgia, Ukraine, anything, history was not ending by any means, maybe
Yeah, it was always
kind
a big
of,
promise. Now it feels like that promise has shattered, that neoliberal promise, and we're just sort of living in its shards.
well, I think maybe it was just also, yeah, neoliberal ideological line for the West,
Yeah.
that kind of suited the military economic kind of circumstances of the West at that point, for whom it suited to not to have a dissolved Soviet Union and a dissolved Yugoslavia, as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you already told us a bit about the future of the project. We're very excited to see how it's going to develop. And even though the world is pretty insane right now, we'd like to maybe end on a more cheerful note and ask what you're excited about currently, be it artistic, personally, yeah, socially.
That's a very good question. I like that. I don't know. You have me on a tough day. My bathroom flooded. The two neighbors under me. So today I'm wow. But I yeah, look, I don't know, from my perspective. I think things are not feeling great in Ukraine right now. And it's been very difficult. I was optimistic for the first 9 years. I was quite optimistic, and it's not like me not to be, So it is a struggle. The last 2 years have been a struggle in that way. But I don't know. I feel quite alienated by my generation a lot of the time. I think we're like, I don't know, when I was younger, I thought we were going to the world was going to change, that we would vote more, in a more democratic and free thinking way. And I've kind of come to this point where it feels like my generation is kind of massively conservative and massively part of the problem. And, so when I'm optimistic about young people, I think I really feel so much more I don't know, attuned and kind of more, I don't know, sympathetic with young people and what they're thinking about and how they're making work, and how they're kind of dealing with the position of the world in 2025. So I feel really energized by that. I really, really do, you know. And I think the kids are all right. I think they're I think they're going to do some great stuff. So I feel really, really energized by young artists, young musicians, a lot. And I don't know, I feel also kind of optimistic within myself that I think I'm making better and better work than I ever made, and I can see it kind of deepening in my own relationship with it, and the things that I'm thinking about and pushing through to. I do feel kind of optimistic and excited about that, because that's how I want to feel about the work, about my work, about what I do with this one life. So I think that's probably the best I can answer right now.
That's an
Um,
amazing. Thank you so much.
Despite it all.
Thank you so much for
Thank you for extraordinary questions.